Hey guys, it's reynad back once again with another update video for the Bazaar. Thanks for being patient. I know it's a while since the last one, but a lot's happened, and I think I'm going to try to kind of go through it by category. So, first of all, some of the biggest developments we had are the hires, and I wish that I could name drop because these guys are very accomplished, but I think a better way to introduce them will be through video content in the future, so that's what I'm going to look to do. But anyway, who we have onboarded in the past month is the art director and the writer. They're both working on the game already. Well, the art director is starting in about a week from now, but we've done some preliminary stuff already. So what this means is after the art director's had some time to work with us for a while, we'll be able to start having regular visual updates for you guys, and we can kind of show the progression of the setting of the game and the cards, what they look like, and just all these like little different visual elements. And as we iterate on them, you guys will be able to follow the process along and kind of see like how the game ended up looking the way that it did once we launch it, right? So I think that'll be exciting. They're great guys. They're both very accomplished, and yeah, I'm super optimistic about the work they're going to do and how the game's going to turn out. So the writer started a few weeks ago. I'm actually going to be going to the Game Awards with him in a couple weeks. Try to do a little bit of networking just because shockingly, esports is pretty far removed from the actual games industry. So I do feel like a bit on an island, and I want to learn from the guys that make stuff happen in gaming. So that's been good. We'll finally have some lore and some characters come to fruition over the next couple months, and then those characters and the lore is going to help inform the decisions behind the cards that we design, right? Because in a card game, you basically tell the story through these little snapshots that every card represents. And, you can do some things with voice lines and voice acting and sound effects and dynamic card art and things like this to also help tell that story. But, at the end of the day, you need a story to tell. So we finally have somebody on board working on that. That's great news for us. I've also onboarded a musician to help with some of the background tracks for the game boards that we're doing. And it's somebody I'd like to kind of speak about the game a bit too. So it's not just going to be me on update videos in the future, and the content will also be, I think, more specific to areas of the game, and it'll be much more frequent in the future. So what I'm hoping to do is have several videos per month. Maybe one of them's on visual updates and iteration. Maybe one of them's on like a general podcast. Maybe one of them's on world building and writing, and we'll kind of see these different pillars of the game develop over time. That is the update on hires. Well, let me actually just do visuals because that's pretty quick. So we recently brought on some more 2D artists, and we can't do too much work until the art director sets like a clear direction for everything and starts being really hands-on. Like I said, he's starting just like a week from now, but we have been doing some amount of, I guess, sketching is what I would call it. It's really valuable when you play with the build and you actually play the game. It's really valuable to have some sort of imagery on the cards. And it doesn't have to be our imagery, and it doesn't have to be like imagery that is anything close to finalized, but it's important to have some sort of visual thing on a card so that all the cards don't look identical. And the reason that's important is because the human brain starts to build association between art and card effects. It happens in every card game, right? The idea is that after you play a card for the first time, like Fireball and Hearthstone, you get used to that artwork. So the second time you draw Fireball, you'll just kind of see that orange blob, and your brain will associate it with the effect of dealing 6 damage. And this kind of visual representation of cards helps you not need to, read them every single time, and it really makes the game, it's the natural way that people play. So it's important for us to test with some kind of card art, and we have a few quick colorized sketches that were developed that I'd like to show you guys. So yeah, these aren't anything close to finalized art. These are just colorized sketches that are going to be placeholder art for merchant class cards. This is Alexander's crown. This is some goblin dude. This is the bank. So yeah, like this is not what the final art or anything is going to look like. It's just a colorized sketch. You can tell it's like all blurry and stuff. But I think the artist did a great job on just giving us some placeholder stuff to work with, and this will help us build that mental association between cards and effects. A jar of trinkets, that's what this is. I would like to kind of get your guys' opinions on in the comments section. I need an object that can represent a card in the game that gives you 1 money every time you play it. And I don't think that I should use like a copper coin, because you can't reuse a copper coin, right? So the coins in our game, they're brittle. Brittle meaning that after the first time you play them, they're destroyed. They're one-time use, right? I need a reusable thing that makes 1 money. So for the merchant class, I thought, well, a jar of trinkets, right? Basically in Spy Fox, that's where I got this idea from. It's one of my favorite games as a kid. You'd play against this fucking pig boss in a game of Go Fish, and he cheated. It was the first time in my life where I was robbed of victory in a children's card game. That's my evil villain origin story. Anyway, for a merchant, it makes sense to have a jar of trinkets, right? He sells trinkets repeatedly for 1 money, and then if you buy the lemonade stand, that makes 2 money every time it's played. The lemonade stand, also recursively makes money, and then a souvenir shop makes 3 money every time you play it. So for the merchant, I had this idea of what are these like storefronts, or what are these things that he's selling? So for merchant, I think jar of trinkets makes sense, but for the other classes, we also need like a reusable thing that makes 1 money every time. So I don't know if you guys have suggestions for that, but I'm just, mechanically it doesn't change anything. It's easy for us to make a card that just makes 1 money. I'm just trying to figure out what to call it so that flavorfully it makes more sense. We might just use jar of trinkets for everyone, and maybe that's just the thing that people go into the bazaar with and sell to merchants to make a little bit of money. But anyway, if you have ideas, let me know in the comments. Yeah, speaking of lemonade stands, I like how this one looks. But yeah, just some placeholder art. This is prime real estate. Yeah. So we have a little bit of placeholder art to work with. But I'm not going to have true, robust visual updates for you guys, like I said, until we do some work with the art director and people get back from holidays and everything. Basically, everything's going to be full steam ahead in January, so I'm looking forward to that. When it comes to the content side of things and the updates that we do, we have a lot of big stuff happening next month. So next month, we're actually going to be relocating everything in the company to a new location. I'm not going to say where. There'll be a big announcement. It'll be exciting. But long story short, we're going to have me, and where I'm doing game design is going to be right next to the studio and the studio equipment. And it's a big deal because right now we're an hour and a half apart. And what that means is I'll be able to put myself on a schedule and hold myself accountable to making specific types of content on a weekly schedule. And some of it will be team related content and some of it will be streaming related content. But I'll be able to say hey, we're doing a Bazaar update on this subject every Thursday this month. And then for this subject, we're doing it every Tuesday of this week. So long story short, I'll be able to do regular things like podcasts, interviews with other devs from the team, and there should be a much more consistent content release schedule. And most importantly, the game progress starting in January is going to be moving along so much faster as the team grows. And because of that, there's going to be more stuff to show you. So there's just naturally going to be more videos. I've just been in this hiring mode for 2 months, and that's basically what has made these update videos spaced so far apart. So I apologize for that. So I think we went over that. The only other Western hire that I'm going to need to make is a senior level game designer, but not a game designer, a card game designer, which is a very different skill set, right? I've done a lot of research about this is fun to me. It's part of business that I really like, is trying to identify who's the most qualified person for this specific task in the world. It's fun to do for very niche skill sets, because everything in esports is niche. So I did a lot of research basically, and I tried to figure out, where are the best card game designers in the world. And as expected, they're basically all at Wizards of the Coast, right? I mean, Rosewater, Forsyth, probably 2 of the best in the world. I don't think many people would argue with that. But there are a ton of developers at WotC and that have been at WotC. They're just phenomenal at what they do, and they're just brilliant people. So they have much more experience than me too, right? I mean, the truth is, maybe I have good instincts. I hope I do, just from talking to Twitch chat a lot. But I've never made a game before. There's a lot of stuff I'm going to overlook or just not be aware of. And I think it's important to have an adult in the room to help with game design. I'm not doing 100% of it myself either. I do have a great assistant developer that's with us full time out of Michigan. But he's very young, very inexperienced too. He's never made a game before either. But I think we have good instincts. We're going to make a great one. We just need an adult in the room. This is a hire I'm still looking around for. So what I did is I asked around my network and just the card game world over the past decade plus. I talked to some folks that I really respect that have worked on a lot of different games. LSV and Kibler. They both made some great suggestions, made some intros to developers that I should meet. Some of them are very known developers. I mean, they're all very known developers, actually. I'm very excited to get in touch with more experienced folks and try building the team so that we have all of our bases covered. And that my big worry is just overlooking something, right? I want to make sure that we're at least trying to address anything that could potentially be a pitfall, like having me design 100% of a game with no input from other people. That's really exciting. I had some great interviews and some great follow-ups. I'm eager to, bring a senior dev on, either in like a consulting role, maybe full time if they're available. Like I said, a lot of these guys are juggling 10 other card games right now, and it's we'll see how realistic full time is, but yeah. Anyway, I think that covers all the hiring stuff for the most part. So I just wanted to give you guys updates there. But as part of this process of trying to find the senior level game designer, what we did is we invited one of them to come out here to Los Angeles for a few days, and we basically just sat on this couch behind me every single day and just did a lot of game design development. And that was super valuable. Like, I know it was just 3 days of working together, but Ben was here, the assistant designer, and then the senior designer was here. And the three of us basically sat together, and it was just so valuable hearing how the senior level designer thought about game design. Because the way that, it was like a big perspective shift in the way that he designed cards, right? It's like for us, if we wanted to design a new like class or a new archetype or a new set of cards, we'd always think about like what's a compelling mechanic or like what's an interesting mechanic that would create some interesting decision points. And it didn't always end with like the most fun result. It would just end up with like a puzzle a lot of times. And the senior level game designer asked very different questions from the get-go. So, if we're trying to design like an alchemist class or like an engineer class, he would ask, what is the dream behind this, right? And what that means is, what is the dream scenario that happens with this class? Or what is the dream scenario that happens with this archetype that makes the player feel really good and excited, like something cool happened and he achieved something, right? So this is a really valuable way to think about card design, because when you start with the dream scenario and you work backwards from that, the mechanics and everything just kind of fall into place. And you'll know that the end product that you're ending up with is something that is entertaining. That was really helpful for us. When we think about card design in that way, we looked back on a lot of the different designs that we did before then, and because there was no dream scenario, or the dream scenario was just kind of lame, or it was just one of those mechanics that's about resource management, which just felt like math, suddenly we could just scrap all of those mechanics, and that's really valuable. The other thing, or one of many lessons that we learned that I think is very valuable, I touched on this in the last update video, the September one, quite a bit. This lesson that we learned is we have to think about card design from the perspective of how many inputs is this card? As in, like, in order to play it, or in order to do this card's effect, how many times is the player going to have to click? And that's a super valuable way of thinking about something, because when you start with that as the basis of designing every card, you actually end up having a game that plays much faster because it's going to be less input heavy. And the player's just going to have to click a lot less. Things will just feel smoother. When you finish a game, you're not going to feel exhausted or like it was tedious. That's important. And I think like I'm just trying to give you guys like 3 big lessons that I learned working with a more experienced game designer. The third one that I thought was very valuable is, I forgot exactly what he called it. I don't think he had a term for it. I'm going to call it escalating complexity, I guess is how I'd put it. In a game like Magic or Hearthstone, one phenomenal thing about these games is that even though they get pretty complicated and they're very hard games at a certain point, they never start complicated. They always start very simple. When I play a game of Magic, I play one card on turn 1. I play my land. It's the only permanent in play. I pass the turn. It's very simple. And, on turn 2, I play a second land and I play a creature. Now there's like one thing on the board and like a couple land. And the game starts very simple without a lot of moving parts, but as it plays on, it escalates in complexity. And that's a great thing for getting a player into a game, because when you start, it's not very daunting. You understand what you're doing turn 1, turn 2, turn 3, and then the game doesn't just suddenly become complex over the course of one play. The game becomes complex gradually over the course of decisions being made. And then when you get to late game, then there's a lot going on. So Hearthstone does a great job of this too. When you start playing Hearthstone, there's nothing on the game board. Maybe you do nothing on turn 1. On turn 2, you play one creature. Suddenly it's the only creature in play. That aspect of game design is really powerful, because you never scare your players off from having too many options. Now, when you compare this to the Bazaar, this is actually a huge problem that we had, is our game was just daunting right away. If I pull up a picture of our game board and I make the video a little less handsome for a second. In our game, you have all these piles. You have you start playing a game and you have 6 stores in front of you, and you have all these cards in your hand that do stuff, and then you have to click every individual card. And then what if you're the kind of player that wants to save your money? Then you don't know that you have to play your card or it gets discarded. It's just like there's a lot going on. It's messy. There's too many options. And it made us think, like, how do we, with all these lessons in mind, how do we make that introductory experience better? Not just from the first time you play the game, but every time you play the game. How can the beginning of the game start simple and get more complex as it goes on? One way that we started thinking about the game is in terms of player inputs. How many actions is the player making on turn 1? How many actions is the player making on turn 2? Like, how many inputs are they doing in turn 3? Whatever word you want to use, input or action. Ideally, in a game like Magic or Hearthstone, the amount of inputs on turn 1 is like 0 to 1, right? Like, you play 1 land, you pass the turn. So we wanted to make it that easy. So what we did is, first of all, we changed the starting decks of cards into just having Jar of Trinkets, right? The card that just makes 1 money when it's drawn. And instead of making the player manually drag it out of the hand repeatedly, like you've seen in all the other videos, we decided, let's just make all these coins autoplay. Yes, we lose some mechanics and some complexity, and like there's all these ways you can manipulate bad cards in your hand. Suddenly, doing those kinds of things in that way is harder. But the benefit is the game is just so much nicer to play. You start your turn and you're not just sitting there dragging stuff out of your hand, playing this tedious game. Suddenly, like, the money just flies out of your hand. You have 5 coins to spend and you're making a decision right away. What am I buying? With 0 clicks, I've drawn my 5 cards. I've played my 5 cards. I have resources. And now I do the fun part of the game, which is deciding what am I going to buy. The other part that helps us make the game escalate in complexity, and this is something that we talked about in previous update videos months ago. It's also something that I don't remember exactly, but I think somebody might have recommended this in a YouTube comment at some point. If you did, thank you. We're changing the amount of stores as the game goes on. So starting on turn 1, when you load into the game, we're only going to have 2 stores available. If you only have 1 store, then there's no option. If you have 3 stores, it's excessive, right? So if you have 2 stores, you're just deciding between 2 cards, Rat King or Batwing, right? One of these 2. Then all you're making on turn 1 is 1 input, right? On turn 1, I'm buying this thing, I'm passing the turn. And then as the game goes on, the deck is making more resources, it's drawing more cards, you have more inputs, you have more like cards that you've purchased added to your deck, and the game will basically be more complicated as it goes on, no matter what. But the initial few turns are going to be very low input, right? 1 click, pass the turn. And I think that's great. Now, the final issue we had, and I realize that this is like too in the weeds, but originally the starting deck we had 10 cards in it. And a 10-card starting deck is pretty standard when it comes to deck building games, because a 10-card starting deck, if you're drawing 5 cards per turn, means that you spend 2 turns buying cards before you shuffle the cards that you bought into your deck and you get to play them for the first time. So when you buy Batwing, it doesn't go to your deck, it goes to your discard pile, right? So when I buy Batwing, it goes to my discard pile. Turn 2, I draw the rest of my deck, I buy something else. Turn 3, I shuffle everything together because I ran out of cards at that point. And turn 3 on, now I can finally draw this Batwing that I bought early on. Long story short, I'm explaining like how deck building games work. But the issue this created in our game is that starting on turn 1, if it's my turn, and I have 5 cards in my hand, right? 5 Jar of Trinkets or whatever, I have 5 money. I have no incentive to buy a card. It's strictly better to just pass the turn to the opponent, see what they're going to buy, so I have more information, then go back to my turn and then decide what to buy. I just have to make a purchase before I shuffle or before the day-night cycle refreshes the cards in my store. So how do we fix this problem? It was really weird that, like, I want the most intuitive way to play to be the optimal way to play, right? You load into a game of the Bazaar, you have some money, there's cards in front of you, you buy one of them. That's turn 1, right? It should be that simple. Instead, the optimal play was you load into a game, you press end turn, you watch your opponent do something, then you buy something on your next turn. And that's really unintuitive. So I didn't like that that was the optimal way of playing. So how do we solve this problem? Well, we just do 9-card decks instead of 10-card decks. If you do a 9-card deck, you draw 5 of them on turn 1. You have 5 cards in your hand, 4 cards in your deck. If you buy something, on turn 2, you're going to shuffle that card into your deck, and you'll be playing the card starting on the first loop, right? There's a lot of incentive to buy this Batwing because I'm going to get to play it as soon as turn 2, as long as I buy it on turn 1. If I don't buy the Batwing, my deck is still going to shuffle. Maybe I saved some money or whatever, but now I missed one use of this Batwing card because it wasn't in my deck. I couldn't loop around and play it. So I think that is a much more elegant gameplay experience now. When you jump in, you're going to buy something, you're going to pass the turn. As the game drags on, I forgot to mention this earlier, more stores are going to open up. So we start the game with just 2 stores on day 1. And on this player's 3rd turn, it's the dawn of a new day, right? Day 2 rolls around, all the stores refresh. And we're going to open up a 3rd store. And on the 3rd day of the game, this will be around turn 5. On the 3rd day of the game, the player will have a 4th store potentially open up. So the game is getting more complex as you play, more options. We're still not sure about the 4th store, but it's cool to have the option and it's cool to think about it. One other game design element that I changed is the token layer of cards. So in our game, we really wanted counterplay, right? It shouldn't just be 2 guys playing solitaire trying to race to make the best deck. Like, for the most part, I think that's still a compelling game. I still think it's interesting. That's how a lot of deck builders work. But we wanted to introduce some counterplay so you could slow the other guy down and interact with your opponent more. So one way to do that is you mess with your opponent's stores. We basically would have these store cards, and we would have ways of covering them up with certain effects, right? Like, if I'm the wizard, I could put an ice wall to cover my opponent's store, and he has to break the ice wall with damage before he can buy the card under it. And the way this token system worked originally was pretty weird. What it would basically do is when you put a token on top of, like, sorry about all the typos, by the way. This was really crudely drawn. This is like very quickly done. We never updated it, actually. Anyway, let's say for this card, right? It gets covered by Ice Wall. Now, when Ice Wall gets destroyed, a different card takes its place. It's not going to be Rinf of Fire, or Ring of Fire, you know. It's not going to be the same card. If it gets covered by a token, and the token gets destroyed, this card got replaced. And this was like a psychological, like, feel-bad moment where the player felt like these cards that should just be getting in the way and slowing me down, they're like taking away this thing that I intended to buy. And that felt really bad. So what we created is like a 2-layer system. So now the game has 2 layers. The base layer is the stores themselves, right? These are the cards that are showing up that you can purchase. And then there's the token layer above it. So now when there's a token on top of a normal store card, you'll be able to see the card under it, so you'll know it's there. And when the token gets destroyed, you can still buy that original card that was under there. And when the day-night cycle refreshes, even if your card is covered, the store card is going to refresh to a different one. So by the time you unlock that store by getting rid of the token, the card under it will be current with the state of the game, because our game has turn-based spawning, meaning that some of the store cards only show up late games. You know, you don't want to like unlock a store and then have a card from turn 1 still be there. So this is really elegant, we think. If you have like a store card and you have a token on top, and suddenly there's another token that covers the same store, it just replaces the token layer. So there can only be one card on the token layer at all times. You can't just stack like 10 ice walls on the same store. So that's like a pretty big change, the way this works now. You know, we finally codified how we want the token layer to work. I think that's pretty close to optimal, but I'm open to other suggestions if you guys see some problems with that. But in terms of like big game design changes, I think those are the more significant ones that we recently did, aside from, you know, nailing down what some of the classes are going to play like a lot more. I don't want to like completely like spoil how the classes are going to play for you, so I'm not going to talk about like all the stuff we did with like the engineer class, but we're getting better. And we're learning quickly, and the game is sweet. So yeah, I'm excited. So I've shown you guys some of the visual sketch stuff. I talked about the hires. I talked about the game design lessons. I think for the most part, that covers every subject I wanted to touch on. I hope this was interesting for you guys. Like I said, starting January, when everybody's back from holidays and everything, we're really going to be hitting the ground running on development. We're already moving very quickly, but it'll be just, everybody will be onboarded. We'll be full steam ahead in January. And I'm excited to give you guys some updates that are going to be just a little bit more fun. It's not just going to be me like rambling about a million different subjects. It'll be, you know, like a dedicated music update video, or a dedicated graphic or like 2D art video, or like a dedicated sound effect, or like animation video. So we'll be able to kind of show the different parts of the project through specific videos. And I think that's valuable because then we can really get in the weeds about the details and like the process of making the best game that we can. So I hope this has been interesting for you guys. I'm going to see you next time. In the meantime, I do have a little bit of That's not a homework, but it's an ask. I have a favor to ask. If in the comments section you guys could give me suggestions for dreams in games, it doesn't necessarily have to be in card games, but just a dream, that would be really helpful for us in terms of game design. Because, you know, as soon as we have these scenarios that are really fun, we can work backwards from them and create a really compelling mechanic or a compelling class. So some examples of dreams in a game, let's say for a card game, ramping up and playing a giant dinosaur really fast and then killing your opponent with the dinosaur, right? So it's like rampant growth into Giganosaurus, you know, like that's a real dream. Something like drawing 20 cards and comboing off with specific chain of events. That's a dream. Just smorking my opponent by just throwing fireballs directly at him and ignoring everything else. That's a dream. Gaining a bunch of life and drawing a million cards and not killing my opponent, but just having perfect control of the game. Like, that's a dream. Being in a giant unstoppable mech suit that kills everybody. That's a dream. Yeah, anyway, these are just examples. But if you guys have ideas in that vein, that would be helpful. So if you guys can give me some dreams in the comments, that is like super helpful. Twitch chat and YouTube and Reddit, Twitter, they're also helpful for this because you guys are great for getting a lot of ideas down very quickly. So anyway, yeah, thanks for watching. Thanks for helping. Like I said, even if I don't respond to all the comments, I do read all of them. And it does mean a lot that you guys are so actively engaged. But yeah, look forward to updating you guys more in the next video. And I'll see you then.